Tonight, I'm going to tell you an orphan's story, because that is what has become, an orphan of sorts. Having outlived my mother, my father, my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents. Now, I've had the great good fortune of being an adult before I became an orphan, which means I've had the great good fortune of having the guidance of the generation before me as I make my way through life. But now that I'm a 50-something orphan, I realize that with the passing of the generation before me, so too went the passing of my easy access to their stories. Now, many of these stories, I know, I was there, I helped create the stories, but other stories, important stories, stories about these people, the lives that they lived, the loves that they loved. These stories I have to create now in my mind using the clues available to me, the words that were said while I was growing up, or more often in my family, the words that were left unsaid. The images in my mind that just won't leave, in fact, get stronger over time. These are what I must use. So tonight, the story I'll tell you is just that, an orphan story, a best guess about a man that I fear I did not see completely. And it's a bit of a haunting story, because if I'm guessing this correctly, I want to do the impossible. I want to change the end of this orphan story. I want to take that image that won't fade. I want to change it. My Uncle Jim was larger than life. My brothers, my sister, and I, we adored him, and why not? He was so much fun to be around. Joining us at Thanksgiving or Christmas or when we vacationed on the Cape. Arriving always alone, never with a girlfriend, and certainly not a wife, which was great by us. Because we could have our Uncle Jim all to ourselves, and we would laugh with him, and we would wrestle with him, and we would tell him our stories, and we would listen as he told his. He was a young man when I was born. He was 30 years old. But to me, he was neither young nor old. He was just ageless. He was a big man with a big laugh that he would share with friends and families and strangers alike. If I had the ability to create my own gods back then, Uncle Jim would have been one of them. Not only could he walk on water in my mind, but in my mind, he was water and everything else. Now, this part of the story that I've told you about Uncle Jim, this is true. I know. I was there. But this is where the clouds start rolling in. This is where it starts getting less clear. This is where I wish I had the generation before me so I could ask them, am I getting this correctly? Am I guessing this correctly? Because if I am understanding Uncle Jim's life, it should not be held in darkness and shame by one man kneeling in the back of a church. It should be brought out. It should be celebrated by all who knew him, all who loved him, all whom he loved. My Uncle Jim died in 1974. He was 44 years old. I was 13. He died alone, I am told. He died of complications to knee surgery, I am told. When you're 13 years old and your larger-than-life uncle is alive one minute, then dead the next, so much happens so fast, it all starts swirling around you, tornado-like, and the best you can do is reach out and grab the images as they're flying by like so much debris in the wind. And you hold on to each image as if it's a treasure, because it is a treasure. And you look at each image and you ask each image to help you understand, to help you relieve the pain in this 13-year-old body. And then you put those images aside. And when you're an orphan, you look at them again. And you ask the images to help you tell a more complete story about a more complex man. A man who lived and laughed and loved. But a man, I'm thinking, was not alone. Let me tell you about those images that I took from the tornado 10:44, 10:44. Those were the numbers that were glowing on my bedroom clock when my mother woke me up in the middle of the night as she was screaming into the phone, "No, no, 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 no," to the doctors who just told her that her only sibling, my only Uncle Jim, just died. The room full of people laughing at a wake. How could so much pain be joined with so much laughter? The page after page after page of the sign-in book at the funeral. So many people there for my Uncle Jim. The endless line of people all there for my Uncle Jim, a man who I'm told lived alone. A man who I'm told died alone. A man who I know lay alone. Dressed in a suit, not in a casual shirt, not in a loud sweater, not in an occasional ascot as I recall him, but in a suit. But of all the things I remember this the most. As we, the bereaved family, were leaving the church following the casket, after all of God's words were said, after all of God's songs were sung, we were leaving the church. And I remember turning and seeing Tom Kennedy, my uncle's best friend, kneeling alone, covering his face as if ashamed to be seen, crying uncontrollably. And I remember thinking to myself, that's odd. A man alone crying for another man. And I remember thinking to myself, is that how best friends cry? And I remember thinking to myself, will I cry like that for my best friend someday? And I remember thinking to myself, Tom Kennedy should leave with our family. And I remember thinking to myself, I should ask Tom Kennedy to leave with my family. And I remember thinking to myself, those words should be left unsaid. So, of all the things that I can remember, I remember this the most. It's as if this image is talking to me now. It's as if it's saying to me, I am the image that matters. I am the image your Uncle Jim wants you to see to help tell his more complete story. In 1971, my Uncle Jim stopped visiting us alone. Which is not to say that he stopped visiting us. He just would no longer be alone when he arrived. He would be with a friend. I remember 3 different friends. The first, tall, dark, I think he was particularly handsome. The next, shorter, curly hair, really nice smile. I don't remember their names. They only came to our house once or twice. But the third man I remember. The third man was Tom Kennedy. I remember his long shoulder-length hair. I remember his thin body. I remember his remarkable Boston accent. That was Tom Kennedy. Tom and Jim would come to our house often. And we would go to Jim's house as well. I remember one time my brother and I slept over at Jim's apartment. It was so cool that we played cards that night. Jim, my brother Steve, Tom Kennedy, myself. I remember my Uncle Jim was dealt a bad hand and he threw it on the ground and he swore. And Tom Kennedy reprimanded him in a not in front of the children kind of way. I remember my uncle went on a dream of a lifetime trip to Ireland, and he brought with him his friend, Tom Kennedy. And I still remember the photographs, the rolling green hills, the sheep crossing the road, Tom Kennedy waving to the camera, Uncle Jim waving to the camera, but never Tom and Jim in the same photograph. And I wonder now, is that how men traveled in the 70s? Together, but separate. So these are the things that I have to recreate this more complete story about James Edward Fitzgerald, my mother's only brother, my only Uncle Jim, a man who was not a god, but oh God, what a man. A man who I know died, but I'm thinking did not die alone. And his friend, Tom Kennedy, a man who I know cried, but I'm thinking did not cry alone. And here's the part that haunts me. Here's the part, if I could change anything, I would change this. As we're leaving the church, I would turn to Tom Kennedy and I would say, join us and leave with us as a family. And join us at Thanksgiving and join us at Christmas. There's an empty chair at the table now. There is an empty hole in our hearts now. I believe Uncle Jim would want you to be there now. And if you want to cry when you're with our family, then cry. But there is no need to cover your face anymore. There is no shame anymore. There's only an orphan trying to tell a more complete story about his Uncle Jim.